Hey there. Welcome to Dark Lullabies. How was your day? I'm so glad you're here, and I really hope I can help you relax and find some peace tonight. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Okay, let's get started with the first story. Story 1. I was 22 the summer I moved back to my parents' place in the Appalachian foothills. The kind of town where the church steeple and the Dollar General were the only things you could see from the highway, and the nights felt so quiet you could hear the coal trains miles away. I'd just finished school, felt stranded between who I'd been and whoever I was supposed to become. So one lonely night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by old trophies and faded band posters, I downloaded a dating app and told myself it was just to see who was out there. That's how I met Cole. His profile said he was 26, a mechanic who liked bonfires, back roads, and good whiskey, with a couple of pictures of him in work boots and a camo cap, leaning against a beat-up black pickup that looked like half the trucks in town. Our first date was a quick coffee off the main road, a little place wedged between a pawn shop and an insurance office. I treated it like an interview. Half because that's what everyone online said to do, and half because my mom's voice was in my head reminding me how many girls had gone missing off lonely stretches of highway. He showed up on time, shook my hand, asked all the right questions about my job and my plans, tried to make me laugh. Nothing about him set off sirens, but there was this tightness around his smile, like his eyes were working harder than they needed to, studying me, filing things away. Still, it was fine, harmless, and in a town where most people my age had either married at 19 or moved away, fine felt like a small miracle. Our second date was at a bar down in the valley, the kind with neon beer signs and a jukebox that only played old country and early 2000s rock. He ordered whiskey and I stuck to light beer, and by the second round I had a warm buzz. That little floating feeling where the room seems softer and you forget how long winter lasts out there. We traded stories about high school and family, and for a while I relaxed into the idea of being wanted, of having a guy look at me like I was the most interesting thing in the room. But even that night, there were little moments that didn't sit right. At one point he mentioned the road I lived on, not just the name, but the exact turnoff, then laughed and said, "My cousin used to hunt up on that ridge. I know all those curves." And then, like it was nothing, he added, "You've got the little white mailbox with the red flag that's always crooked, right?" I remember blinking because I'd never told him my address, only that I lived back with my parents up on the ridge, and then I told myself I must have let it slip and forgotten. I think the first real chill, the first truly wrong feeling, came a week later, before our third date, when I was lying in bed around midnight and heard a truck idle outside the house. We lived on a sloping gravel drive at the top of a dead-end road. Nobody drove up there by accident. I got up carefully, staying behind the curtain so I wouldn't silhouette myself, and watched a dark pickup sitting at the bottom of the driveway with its lights off, engine rumbling low for what felt like forever, maybe 3-4 minutes, before it eased back down the hill and disappeared. I told myself it was a neighbor turning around, that I was being dramatic. But the next time Cole picked me up, when I walked out to meet him in the driveway, I saw the same dent in the front bumper, the same faded sticker peeling on the back window, and that familiar rumble when he revved the engine. My stomach dropped, but I packed it away neatly in the cabinet where we store the things we don't want to look at. On our third date, we went to a family restaurant off the 2-lane highway that cut along the mountain, a place with plastic booths and a chalkboard with the daily special. Something about seeing him in bright, ordinary light instead of the dim bar made everything sharper. The way he spoke about his exes, always crazy, always ungrateful. The way he talked over me when I tried to change the subject. The way he got irritated when our food took a little too long. I remember thinking, in this detached way, that I wasn't sure our personalities really clicked. That I didn't like the way he seemed to study people's weaknesses and tuck them away like tools. But then, when he walked me to my car, he leaned in, and I let him kiss me. It was a quick kiss. Not awful, not magical, just a moment, but it was enough for me to rewrite the whole evening in my head. on the drive home. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe he was just nervous. Maybe I was the one with the problem, like all those teachers used to say when I was too sensitive. I convinced myself to keep going. A couple of weeks later, we went out on what would be our fourth and last date. He suggested a bar farther out, off a narrow road that wound past strip mines and trailers and scattered cabins, one of those places where the parking lot is just hard-packed dirt and locals nurse drinks for hours. By that night, I wasn't excited anymore. I felt heavy, like I was walking into a test I already knew I was going to fail. I noticed more of the strange little quirks Id tried to ignore. How he watched other people in the bar like he was cataloging them. How he'd fall silent in the middle of a story and just stare. How his laugh never quite reached his eyes. He drank way too much that night, chasing each beer with a shot until the edges of his words blurred and he started getting handsy, sliding his arm around my shoulders, fingers drifting lower, leaning in for kisses I kept turning my cheek away from. I hate public displays of affection. Always have. And in a bar full of people, I went stiff every time he tried. I kept my voice light and polite as I pushed him away, blaming my shyness, my long workday, anything but the truth. After about an hour of that dance, I told him I was exhausted and had an early morning, hoping the hint would land. He slapped some bills on the bar, insisted on paying, and we got our coats and walked out into the cool air that smelled like pine and cigarette smoke. The parking lot was dark, except for one flickering security light over the door and the glow from the highway in the distance. As we crossed the gravel, he stopped and turned to me, his words suddenly clear and blunt. "Why don't you just come back to my place? Or it'll come up to yours." I laughed it off, said, "Not tonight. I'm wiped and I have work," and the lie came easily. He pushed, joking that Head dragged me to work himself, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. The thing that scared me wasn't the words, it was how cold his eyes looked when he said them. Like this was a negotiation and I wasn't holding up my end. I said goodnight, walked to my car, parked under the one weak light, and forced myself not to look back as I got in and started driving. It had a couple of drinks, so I drove slow, extra careful on the curves that dropped off into tree-lined ravines. That road home threaded along the side of the mountain, long stretches with no houses, no gas stations, just the occasional mailbox at the end of a dark lane. Maybe that's why I noticed so quickly that the same pair of headlights was behind me, still there after 3 turns and a fork in the road. I checked my mirror and my heart lurched. Even from a distance I could make out the familiar shape of a black pickup, the glow of one slightly dimmer headlight. I kept hoping he'd turn off, that it was someone else, but when we hit a straight stretch and he closed the distance, I was close enough to see the dent in his bumper. I grabbed my phone at the next stop sign, thumb shaking as I typed, "Are you following me?" The answer came almost immediately. "Yeah, just making sure you get home safe." The words made my skin crawl. If his plan was to make me feel safe, had failed. I called him. Once, twice. He let it ring. While it rang, something happened that still makes my stomach knot when I think about it. His headlights shut off. 1 second. The road behind me was flooded with light. The next, there was only darkness and the faint ghostly outline of his truck, a shadow clinging to my bumper. Out here, on these mountain roads, when someone kills their lights and keeps driving, you don't forget it. The only reason I could still see him at all was the way my taillights reflected off his grill. Then a text buzzed. "Relax. I can still see you." It was such a small sentence, but every hair on my neck stood up, because in the middle of nowhere, that sounded less like reassurance and more like a threat. At the next wide gravel pull-off, I jerked my car over, heart pounding, and watched him roll up slow behind me. I typed, "Stop following me. I'm fine. Go home," and hit send. His truck paused in the road, idling in the dark, and for a second I thought he might get out. Then he crept past, and I watched his taillights disappear around the bend. I sat there breathing hard, trying not to cry, the engine ticking in the quiet. By the time I got home and crawled into bed, the adrenaline had faded into this hollow, shaky feeling. Lying in the dark, the phone lit up with a message. Hope I didn't weird you out tonight. Sorry I got so drunk. Next time we can do something chill, like dinner at my place." I stared at those words, that casual next time, and something in me hardened. I didn't respond. In the morning, he followed up with, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" I still didn't answer right away, wanting to choose my words carefully, wanting to be kind, because that's how girls are raised out here. Don't be rude, don't be dramatic, don't make a scene. Less than 2 hours later, he sent a single question mark, and that tiny symbol felt more aggressive than any insult. I finally wrote back, hands trembling a little, but trying to sound calm. I told him I'd enjoyed getting to know him, but that I didn't feel like our personalities really connected and I needed to focus on myself. I hit send and immediately felt this huge sense of relief, like I'd finally admitted something to myself as much as to him. His replies came fast and furious. The worst one said, "No, I don't understand. You strung me along for 4 dates to tell me that? You can pay me back half of everything I spent on you." Other texts brought up personal things I'd mentioned in passing, twisting them into jabs. It was enough for me to block his number, my hands clammy on the screen. I thought that would be the end, that the story would shrink into one of those bad dating anecdotes you tell years later over drinks. But then the calls started. No caller ID, one after another, ringing until I silenced my phone, the screen lighting up on my nightstand over and over as the seconds dragged by. I never picked up. Eventually, he stopped. The next day, while my parents were at work in town, I pulled into our gravel drive after my shift and saw a bouquet of wildflowers propped against the front stoop, tied together with twine, a card tucked between the stems. It should have been sweet. Instead, my throat tightened. We lived way off the highway, past a rusted gate and up a hill that eats cell service. You don't just swing by there. The card was an apology from Cole, all looping handwriting about second chances and how he couldn't stop thinking about me, and had loved to cook me dinner somewhere private, where we can really talk. The fact that Head stood on that porch, the one my dad always said felt like the safest place in the world, made my skin crawl. That evening, I used my dad's old flip phone, the one he kept for emergencies, to send Cole one last message from a number he didn't know. I told him not to contact me again, not to come to my house, that if he did, he'd go to the police and get a restraining order. Then I powered the phone off and shoved it in a drawer. I wanted to believe that would draw a line he wouldn't cross. A few nights later, my parents went out of town to stay with my aunt while she recovered from surgery, and I stayed behind because I had work early the next morning. The house felt bigger and emptier than usual, creaking in the way old houses do when the temperature drops and the night settles over the hills. I double-checked the locks before bed, pausing at the back door that opened onto the deck overlooking the tree line. For some reason, the chain was hanging loose when I could have sworn it latched it earlier. I locked it, told myself I was just tired, and went upstairs to my room, a loft at the top of the house where you could see the tops of the trees and the sweep of stars above the mountain. Sometime after midnight, in that deep, heavy sleep where dreams blur into the dark, I woke up with my heart pounding, as if something had yanked me to the surface. At first, I didn't know why. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of crickets. Then I heard it. A soft, unmistakable sound from downstairs, like a door easing open, then the gentle thud of it closing. Every instinct in me went very, very still. For a few seconds, I tried to rationalize it, the house settling, the wind, but then I heard another noise, this time closer, the faint creak of one of the upstairs doors, the kind my dad always swore head oil but never did. Nobody was supposed to be home, even groggy. My brain landed on one word with crystal clarity. Intruder. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, the old wooden frame complaining under my weight, and lowered myself onto the floor, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Our floor was carpeted, which muffled sound, but I could just barely make out footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the hallway. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and shimmied under the bed, pressing myself flat against the dusty underside of the mattress, fingers shaking as I dialed 911. I whispered into the receiver, gave the dispatcher my address and as many details as I could, my voice so quiet I could barely hear myself. While she asked me questions, I texted my family group chat with my free hand. Is anyone home? The dots popped up and vanished as my mom typed back that they were still at my aunt's, hours away. I could hear drawers opening in the guest room, the faint clink of objects being moved. Then my bedroom door opened with a soft sigh, and footsteps started up the carpeted stairs to the loft. They stopped at the top. Silence pooled around me. I stared through the thin fabric of the bedskirt and saw nothing but shadow and the faint wash of moonlight from the window. Then I heard the drawers of my nightstand open and close, the slide of wood on wood, my lamp being shifted, the soft rasp of fingers moving things around. I clamped my hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. My entire body felt like a held breath. A man's low voice muttered, "God damn it," under his breath. And in an instant, I knew it was Cole, not because of what he said, but because of the particular way he said it, the way I'd heard him say it at the bar when his card got declined for a second before going through. Panic and anger and a bleak kind of disbelief crashed together inside me. He kept rummaging, pulling open more drawers, the small sounds huge in the quiet room. Then, horribly, the mattress shifted above me as he sat down on the edge of the bed. From where I lay, I could see the dark outline of his boots through the dust ruffle, toes planted in the carpet not 2 feet from my face. I lay there, body numb, imagining every possible outcome if he decided to look under the bed. He sat there for a long time, 2, maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like an hour, breathing slow and heavy, sometimes shifting his weight so the frame creaked. At one point, he reached back toward the pillows. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I heard the soft scrape of paper against fabric, something being placed carefully on the bed. Later, after he left, I would see what it was. A printed photograph of me taken from outside the house a few days earlier, standing on the deck in my work scrubs, a mug in my hand, staring out into the trees. On the back, in blocked letters, had written, "You look better up here." Next to it, laid neatly like a piece of jewelry, was a small brass key I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, the old key to my bedroom door that I'd lost years ago and assumed was gone forever. That meant he'd been in the house before. Somewhere in the past, I hadn't noticed him. I didn't know any of that yet, though. All I knew in that moment was the weight of him on the mattress and the burn in my lungs as I tried not to sob. After a while, he stood and the bed frame sighed in relief. I heard him curse softly again, more frustrated than angry. Then the quick shuffle of him sliding my drawers shut. His footsteps moved away, down the stairs, across the hallway. Then the distant sound of the back door opening and closing, a whisper of night air rushing in. The dispatcher was still on the line, whispering with me, telling me officers were close. I stayed under the bed for another 10, maybe 15 minutes, until red and blue lights flashed against the trees, and I heard a firm knock at the front door, even opening that door for the deputy. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I told him everything I could get out without dissolving. About Cole, about the dates, the following, the flowers, the way had just been in my room. Another officer arrived, a woman this time, and they did a slow, methodical sweep of the house, checking closets, the tiny crawl space off the hallway, even the little attic hatch in the laundry room. Every window was unlocked. On the dining room side, one of the big windows overlooking the yard was cracked open just enough for someone to have forced it. Outside, in the damp dirt under the bushes, you could just make out smudged impressions where someone had crouched. I showed them the photo and the key on my bed with shaking hands. And I'll never forget the way the female officer's eyes changed when she saw them, something like anger. Like a line in her had been crossed. They took the things as evidence, took my statement, gave me a case number, and told me to call if anything else happened. When my parents came home the next day, they'd already heard most of it from my frantic late-night calls and texts. But sitting in that kitchen, with the morning light slanting through the blinds, and my dad's hands wrapped around his coffee like it was the only thing anchoring him, it felt real in a way it hadn't yet. We went down to the sheriff's office together, handed over screenshots of Cole admitting head, followed me home, messages, everything. They said they'd look into it, but without a clear shot of his face in the house, or fingerprints that weren't ours, without a confession, it was going to be hard to prove Head been the one inside. I did manage to get a restraining order, a stack of paper that said he had to stay away from me and my family and that any contact would send him straight to jail. They warned me not to reach out to him, not to accuse him publicly of breaking in, because any misstep could complicate things later. On paper, that should have made me feel safer. In reality, every creak of the porch boards, every crunch of gravel in the driveway after dark, every sweep of headlights across the trees sent my heart slamming against my ribs. From that night until the day I finally moved out of the mountains, I never fully relaxed in that house again. Sometimes, lying in bed, I was sure I could feel someone watching from the tree line, just beyond where the porch light could reach. I never saw Cole again. Not up close anyway, but once or twice, driving home from the grocery store at dusk, I'd spot a familiar black truck pulled over at a turnout overlooking the valley. A figure leaning against the hood, face hidden in shadow, and I'd keep my eyes straight ahead and my hands locked at 10 and 2, pretending I hadn't noticed. Even now, years and miles away from that town, with different license plates and a whole new life, there are nights when a truck idling outside or an unknown number lighting up, my phone drags me right back to that loft, to the sound of footsteps on carpet and the weight of someone sitting on my bed while I held my breath under it. People like to say, at least nothing happened, as if the absence of a headline means there was no damage. But something did happen. A piece of my sense of safety got taken, and I don't think I'll ever fully get it back. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me unspool this. And if any part of it feels familiar, if you've ever ignored your gut because you didn't want to make a fuss, or stayed on a fourth date with someone who scared you just a little, I hope you'll tell me in the comments what red flags you wish you'd trusted sooner, or what you'd say now to your younger self in my place. Story 2. I was in 6th grade when it happened. Old enough to think I understood what creepy meant from horror movies and campfire stories, but not old enough to recognize it when it was staring straight at me in the hallways of my middle school tucked into a narrow Appalachian valley. Our town was one of those places where the schools sat right below the mountains, the football field pressed up against a tree line, and coal trains groaned through the night like distant thunder. That October, the week of Halloween, I stayed after school almost every day to help decorate the gym for our so-called haunted barn, which was just the gym and a couple of classrooms transformed with black trash bags, fake spider webs, and dollar store skulls. I did it partly for the free pizza they bribed us with, and partly because it felt good to belong to something. Even if it was just a group of kids taping trash bags to cinder block walls while the late sun slipped behind the ridge and turned the windows into dark mirrors. Along with my friends, there was this other kid who stayed late too. You'll call him Evan. He was in my grade, average height, always in the same faded hoodie with the sleeves chewed at the cuffs, hair that fell into his eyes. We'd gotten along well enough. He'd make dumb jokes while we painted cardboard tombstones. And he was the kind of kid teachers liked because he was quiet and did his work. There was nothing in those afternoons, cutting out paper bats and hanging them from the ceiling, that made me feel uneasy about him. If anything, I felt a little sorry for him. He usually got picked up last, standing out in the chilly parking lot with his hands stuffed in his pockets while the buses disappeared one by one around the bend. One evening, while we were setting up the haunted maze in the gym, I remember stepping behind one of the makeshift walls made of sheets and cardboard and finding something that didn't look like any of the props we'd been working on. A life-sized outline of a body traced on butcher paper, like the chalk outlines you see in crime shows. And right where the heart would be, someone had written my name in red marker, big and clumsy. For a second, my brain tried to turn it into a joke, some weird attempt at humor. But there was something about the way my name was written that made my stomach drop. The letters were pressed hard into the paper. The marker had bled through. I called one of my friends over, and we laughed it off in that strained middle school way, ripping it down and crumpling it. But the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the image of my name pinned to that fake body in the shadows of the gym. At the time, I didn't connect it to Evan. I didn't connect anything to him. 2 weeks later, Halloween was over. The decorations were gone. The air had turned sharper. And one day, between classes, a flock of girls from my grade swarmed around me by the lockers near the end of the hall. They were buzzing with that contagious excitement only middle schoolers have, eyes wide, smiling like they knew something huge. They told me, almost talking over each other, that I had a secret admirer and he was going to text me that night, and they wouldn't tell me who it was, only that I should be ready. I pretended to roll my eyes, but inside I was both terrified and a little bit thrilled in the way you are when you're 12 and you've never really been wanted before. I spent that whole bus ride home staring at my phone, watching the mountains pass outside the window, trying to imagine who it could be. I lived right across the small 2-lane road from the school. Our house tucked up on a little rise so I could look out my bedroom window and see the buses lined up in the afternoon and the football field lights when there was a game. That night, just as I was about to go to sleep, my iPad pinged with a notification from Messenger, the only app I had that my parents let me use to message them when they were working late. The name on the screen was Evans. I'd almost forgotten. I'd added him on Facebook after the Halloween carnival when everyone was tagging each other in pictures. His first message was simple. He said he needed to talk to me. It was enough to make my stomach twist. I asked if everything was okay. Then the typing bubbles appeared, and they stayed there for so long it was like watching storm clouds gather. When the message finally came through, it was a long paragraph that felt like it went on forever. He told me how he'd been in love with me since the first week of school, how everything I did drove him crazy in a good way, how he stayed after to help decorate because he wanted to be near me. He said he'd been trying to impress me at recess, kicking the soccer ball harder, playing goalie just so I would notice him, but I always walked right past. He wrote that he was tired of being ignored and he needed me to understand how much he cared. And then the last line was him asking if I would be his girlfriend. I remember feeling my face get hot even though I was alone in my room. I barely knew this kid. We'd shared some jokes and glue sticks. That was it. The intensity of the words made me shrink inside myself. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen, thinking about how we lived in a small town where everyone knew everything, and how humiliating it would be if I said yes, and then realized I didn't like him that way. I didn't want to be cruel, but I also knew I couldn't lie, so I chose what felt like a kind rejection. I told him I didn't like him like that, and I thought we should just be friends. I could tell from the rapid-fire replies that he did not take it well. He kept demanding to know why, asking me to give him a reason he could fix, like this was a test he could study for. Every answer I gave only led to another question. Eventually he went quiet, and I let myself believe that maybe it was over. The next morning, though, the air in school felt different. As soon as I walked into the building, I sensed it. That weird crackling energy of people whispering about you behind cupped hands. Some of the boys in my grade kept approaching me between classes with mocking grins, saying that Evan really wanted to kiss me, that Head told the whole grade he was going to do it whether I liked it or not. One of them cornered me by the water fountain and said Evan had a plan to catch me alone by the stairwell or the edge of the playground and finally get his kiss. They thought it was hilarious. I didn't. It felt like a threat. That was the first time that cold, animal fear slid under my skin. I went to my homeroom teacher at lunch, my voice shaking as I explained what his friends were saying, how uncomfortable it made me, how I was scared to be caught alone. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he ever got close to me, I should go straight back into the classroom. She said it kindly, but there was something too calm about it, like she thought I was overreacting to harmless middle school drama. It didn't feel harmless. That afternoon in the hallway, when I opened my locker to grab my math book, a folded piece of paper fluttered out and hit the floor. I picked it up and unfolded it, expecting some dumb joke, and instead found a blurry photo printed on cheap paper. My house across the street, taken from the school parking lot at dusk. In the picture, you could see the outline of my bedroom window lit up. Underneath, in the same hard-pressed red marker I'd seen on that butcher paper outline, someone had written, "I know which light is yours." My hands went ice cold. I crumpled the picture and stuffed it in the bottom of my backpack where my parents wouldn't see it. And that's one of the things I still regret. Instead of bringing it to an adult, I let embarrassment and confusion win. Later that day, I went to the principal's office on my own, told him about the messages, the threats of a forced kiss, how I didn't feel safe walking home. He nodded a lot, said he would talk to Evan and take care of it. And for a moment I believed him. I wanted to. After all, adults were supposed to know what to do when a kid said she felt scared. I think it's important to mention that everyone knew I lived right across from the school. You could see our front porch from the buses, and my mom's old sedan was always parked out front. Evan knew exactly how close I was. A few days later, I was walking home like always, the road quiet except for the crows and the distant hum of traffic down in the valley. I crossed from the school side to my side, unlocked the front door, and had barely stepped into the hallway when there was a knock behind me. My mom happened to be home that day, in the kitchen, so she went to answer it while I peeked out from the side window. I saw a shadow dart behind a parked car across the road, like someone had been waiting on the porch and dove out of sight when the door opened. On the welcome mat was a piece of paper folded in half with my name on it. My mom handed it to me with a frown. Inside was a short note saying there was a surprise for me under the Cadillac in our driveway, the old car my brother drove to his job at the garage. My mom went to check while I hovered nervously at the window. She crouched down, looked, then called back that there was nothing there but gravel and some old leaves. We both shrugged it off, but a week later that car broke down in a way none of us really understood. My brother came home furious, saying the mechanic told him some wires underneath looked like they'd been deliberately cut. No one ever proved anything, but my mind went straight to that note about a surprise. The harassment didn't stop. Evan's friends kept hounding me at school, repeating that he would treat me right if I just gave him a chance, as if kindness was something you could bully someone into. In the mornings, I would wake up to messages from him, sometimes sweet and sometimes guilt-tripping, saying he couldn't wait to see me at school, telling me I probably looked beautiful that day, describing in detail what he'd been wearing the day before, like he'd replayed it in his mind all night. Once, as I walked home alone in the fading light, I heard the faint, mechanical click of a phone camera behind me. I turned and caught him half hidden behind a tree by the edge of the parking lot, his arms still up, phone pointed my way. When our eyes met, he jerked the phone down and pretended to look away, but the damage was already done. I remember thinking, in a sudden flash of clarity, that I had no idea how many photos of me had taken without me knowing. Eventually, I was called into the counselor's office, and for the first time in days, I felt a rush of relief. I imagined her telling me he'd been suspended, or that they'd called his parents, maybe even the police. Instead, what happened in that room still makes my chest tight when I think about it. She smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed and told me this was all just part of growing up, that boys sometimes did crazy things when they were in love, and that I shouldn't be mad. I should feel flattered. She said, word for word, that this was the kind of attention girls were bound to get, and the best thing I could do was learn to deal with it. Sitting there in that small office with motivational posters on the wall and the mountains looming gray through the window, I believed her because she was an adult and I was 12, and I had always been taught not to make trouble. I walked out feeling like maybe I was the problem, like I was being dramatic, like I should swallow my discomfort and be grateful anyone noticed me at all. That afternoon, I told my mom everything the counselor had said, every word about boys being boys and how I should be honored by it. My mom's reaction was the opposite of the counselor's calm. She was furious. A few days later, she marched with me into the principal's office, and I sat in a chair in the corner while she demanded to know why nothing had been done yet, why her daughter was being told to accept harassment as a compliment. I remember her asking, very quietly and very clearly, if they were waiting for something bad to happen before they took me seriously. The principal and counselor both sat there, tight-lipped and silent, and at the end of it, my mom told the counselor never to speak to me again without her in the room. Even with that, I don't think the school ever really punished Evan. They might have talked to him. They never told us if they did. Life just went on, at least on the surface. Underneath, my anxiety ramped up, coiling in my stomach every morning when I got on the bus and every afternoon when I watched him across the cafeteria. One weekend, not long after all this, my parents went out shopping in the bigger town down the mountain, leaving me at home with the dog and my homework. It was late, sky already black, and I was watching a YouTube video on my iPad in bed when I heard a sound at my window. My room was on the second floor, facing the school. The only thing that ever hit that glass were birds that misjudged the distance. I sat up, heart hitting my ribs, and listened. A second later, it came again, a sharp, hollow tap, like a small rock striking glass. Then again, and again, in a steady rhythm that sent a chill up my spine. I finally forced myself to climb out of bed and cross the room. I remember the way my hand shook on the curtain. When I pulled it back and looked down, my heart dropped straight through me. Evan was standing in our yard, directly beneath my window, his face tilted up, one hand full of rocks. Even from that height, I could see his eyes. They were too bright, too intense, reflecting the weak porch light like a camera flash. He had arranged something on the grass around him, pages fluttering slightly in the night breeze. It took me a second to realize they were printed photos of me, the same blurry quality as the one from my locker, scattered like petals in a circle at his feet. He was about to throw another rock when he noticed me, and his arm froze midair. His lips moved. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but the shape of them made my stomach twist. I didn't stay to find out what he was trying to say. I dropped the curtain, backed away, and went through the whole house, checking that every door and window was locked, my hands numb and clumsy on the deadbolts. When I finally got back to my room and dared to peek out again, he was gone, but the faint scatter of white pages in the yard was still there, like debris after a storm. My phone buzzed with a string of messages from him, apologies mixed with blame, telling me he just wanted to talk, that he never meant to scare me, that all he wanted was a kiss. The last one said I wasn't who he thought I was, followed by a goodbye that felt more like a threat than an ending. I blocked him after that, and, mercifully, the direct contact stopped. I had to see him almost every day from that year until graduation, through middle school, then high school. Always somewhere in the halls, or at the far end of the cafeteria, always looking a little different, but still fundamentally the same. I never went anywhere alone if I could help it. I never sat with my back to a door. I never opened my locker without a tiny knot tightening in my chest, half expecting another note or photo to spill out. Years later, long after Wed walked across the graduation stage and scattered to whatever lives were waiting beyond the mountains, I heard through the same small-town grapevine that he had been arrested. Nobody seemed to know exactly why, only that it involved something not right with another girl. The saddest and scariest part of my story, even more than the rocks at my window or the photos in the grass, is that an adult looked at all of this and told a sixth-grade girl that it was a compliment, that terror in my own home was just part of being female. I still think about that sometimes when I see news stories or when a little girl in a grocery store flinches away from a boy's unwanted attention and her parents laugh it off. I hope that counselor doesn't work with kids anymore. I hope someone, somewhere along the line, told her how wrong she was. And I hope I never see Evan again. Not in a store aisle, not in a rearview mirror, not in the shadow of a school parking lot. If you've ever gone through something like this, being dismissed when you were scared, or having your boundaries treated like a joke, I'd really like to hear what you would say now to your younger self, or to a kid going through it today. So, if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Story 3. I want to stay as anonymous as I can telling this, because even now, it feels like something that could reach through the screen and touch my life again. They'll change names, and town, and anything that could point back to me, but the bones of it are true, and I still feel it in my chest when the house goes quiet at night. I grew up tucked deep in the Appalachians, in a narrow valley town where the hills rise up so close it feels like the sky is squeezing you. Trains wail through the dark, and most people either stay forever or disappear without looking back. From the time I was a kid, teachers told my parents I had social issues. I was the quiet one in the back who didn't know how to join a group. The kid they pulled out for 20-minute sessions on social skills and speech, like there was something broken in me that needed to be tuned. I never had trouble with schoolwork. It was people that tangled me up. That got a little better as I got older. But even now, I'd still describe myself as an awkward introvert who got lucky and found a few good friends. Girls were harder. I lost my virginity at 21, which I know isn't ancient, but at the time it felt like I was painfully behind everyone else, like I'd missed some secret lesson in how to be wanted. By 23, I'd moved out of my parents' small house near the river and into a place of my own. A narrow two-story house built into the side of a hill at the edge of town, just past the last gas station, where the pavement turns to gravel and cell service starts to drop off. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. 2 floors, a looping layout downstairs where the kitchen opened to a little dining area that fed into a living room and then a den, the rooms circling around a central staircase like a track. For a guy my age in that town, owning any house was impressive. And it'd be lying if I said that didn't make me feel like maybe I was finally catching up. One night, sitting alone on the couch, listening to the wind cut through the trees on the hill, I downloaded Tinder. I told myself it was just curiosity, but really it was loneliness. That's how I met her, Mara. Not her real name, but close enough. Her pictures were the kind that make you wonder why she's on an app at all. Brown hair, bright eyes, a half smile that looked a little shy. Pictures of her on hiking trails in the next county over, sitting on a rock ledge with blue mountains rolling out behind her. We matched, we messaged, and against all my expectations, she agreed to meet. Our first date was at a little restaurant off the highway, the kind with vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since the 90 seconds. I spent the whole time in my own head, convinced I was saying the wrong things, that she was silently regretting driving all the way out. But when I got home that night to my quiet hill house and lay in bed replaying every awkward joke, my phone buzzed with a message from her saying Shed really liked me and wanted to see me again. I remember staring at that text, feeling something wild and light beat against my ribs. It felt like Id slipped into someone else's life. We went on a second date, then a third, then a fourth. I got out of my head a little, started to relax. We became boyfriend and girlfriend faster than I would have thought possible. For a while, it was that high, dizzy honeymoon phase where every notification from her made my day, where anything she wanted with my time or attention felt flattering instead of demanding. When you've been starved for connection most of your life, that first rush feels like a drug. Looking back, the red flags were there even when things still felt good. Early on, maybe a month in, there was a night that should have told me more than it did. It just drifted off to sleep and woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was past 1 a.m. The message was from Mara. "Are you home? Why are your lights off?" Attached was a photo taken from the road at the bottom of my hill. My house in the frame, dark against the tree line. Just a faint glow from my bedroom window. The timestamp on the photo was 1 minute earlier. I remember that cold feeling in my stomach, realizing Shed driven out to my place in the middle of the night without telling me, sat in the dark road looking up at my house, and then texted me about it like it was sweet concern. I laughed it off, told her he'd fallen asleep early, and I pushed the unease down because I didn't want to lose the first person who'd ever looked at me the way she did. As we settled into being a couple, her attention started to feel less like affection and more like surveillance. She texted me constantly, all day, every day. And if I didn't answer fast enough, she'd send question marks or call back to back until I picked up. I told myself she just cared. On the couch one night, wrapped in a blanket watching some forgettable movie, she suddenly insisted we share our locations. I wasn't thrilled. I had nothing to hide. But the idea of someone watching a little dot of me move around on a screen 24/7 made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. Still, I said yes, because saying no felt like risking everything. For a while, nothing dramatic happened, just the usual needy texts. "Why are you at the grocery store so late? Who are you with? Why are you still at your friend's?" Then one Friday night, I went over to my best friend Tyler's house down in the valley. A couple guys came over. We hung out in his basement, shot pool, played video games, the kind of quiet, comfortable night I needed. My phone was in my pocket, buzzing every so often with messages from Mara asking if ID remembered we were supposed to go to a winery the next day. I answered a few, then tried to unplug. An hour or two in, we heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Tyler's mom came down first, then stepped aside, and there was Mara behind her, 3 steps above, eyes locked on me. She didn't even pretend to be calm. She went straight into this loud monologue about how I was ignoring her, how she'd been sitting in her car outside for 20 minutes, watching my location sit on Tyler's house while I didn't answer. I remember feeling my face burn, my friends staring, me mumbling something about talking later, but she refused to back down. Eventually, she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and walked outside, my stomach twisted. Under the yellow pool of the porch light, we had our first real argument. Voices low but sharp. She tried to follow me back to my house, but I told her I needed space, and I drove off alone, watching my mirrors to make sure her car didn't appear on that winding mountain road behind me. When I got home, the house felt like a refuge. I shut the door, locked it, then sat on the couch in the dark, listening to my own breathing while my phone lit up over and over with her name. Finally, I texted her a long message saying we needed a break, that I needed space, that things were moving too fast and she was scaring me. I absolutely should have said it to her face. I know that. But in that moment, being alone with her rage felt like the more dangerous option. As soon as I stopped responding, the pounding started. Someone hammered on my front door so hard the glass in the frame rattled, then leaned on the doorbell like they were trying to burn it out. My neighbor from the house below me came out onto his porch and called up, asking what was going on. Through the door, I could hear Mara screaming back at him, calling me every name she could reach for, telling him I was a liar, that Id used her. He stayed calm, told her she needed to go home, that this wasn't okay. I stood with my ear pressed to the inside of the door, heart racing, listening to every word. Eventually, she left. The quiet that followed felt fragile, like glass waiting to crack. The next morning, on my way to work, I found something that didn't make sense. A small stack of paper tucked under my windshield wiper, wrapped in a rubber band. I slid it out and saw they were printed screenshots of our text conversations, page after page, with certain phrases ID written highlighted in yellow every time ID said I missed her, every time ID called her amazing, every apology Id sent. On the top page, in blue pen, shed written, "You said all this. Don't forget." It felt less like a love note and more like evidence, like a file she was keeping on me. That was the first time I had the thought, not that she was just emotional, not that she was clingy, but that she might actually be dangerous. I blocked her number that afternoon. I should have known she'd find ways around it. A week later, I went back to Tyler's for another guy's night. I was nervous about going, like maybe just being out in the world would tempt her into appearing again, but nothing happened while I was there. I drove back up the mountain around 11 p.m., the road getting quieter and darker the higher I climbed, the forest leaning in on both sides. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light I'd left on. It was a clear night. I could see stars through the bare branches. Inside, everything looked normal. I kicked off my shoes, threw some leftovers in the microwave, and flopped down on the couch to scroll through streaming apps, looking for a horror movie that might help me shake the real-life horror I'd been living. When the microwave beeped and the house fell silent again, I heard it. A soft, distinct click from the other side of the downstairs, followed by the subtle shift of a door moving against its frame. The layout of my house meant the sound had to be coming from the door between the den and the dining area, the one I always kept shut because I have this thing about closed doors. It makes the chaos in my head feel contained. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV, my whole body going still. The house settled around me, the refrigerator humming, the baseboard creaking faintly as the night air cooled the walls. Then, unmistakably, the same door clicked again, as if someone had slowly eased the handle down and let it latch. I called out, stupidly, something like asking who was there. No answer. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening. My skin crawled. I went into the kitchen, keeping as much distance from that part of the house as I could, and pulled the biggest knife from the block. My hands shook so hard I had to tighten my grip with both of them just to feel like I wouldn't drop it. I dialed 911 with my thumb and spoke clearly, on purpose, saying there might be someone in my house, that he'd just broken up with my ex and I was afraid it was her. Part of me wanted whoever was in there to hear that I was on the phone with the police. The dispatcher told me to wait outside if I could, so I stepped out onto the porch and stood in the cold with the knife still in my hand, phone pressed to my ear, staring at my own front door like it might open. The hillside was dark, only a couple of porch lights visible through the trees. The town below, a faint glow in the distance. It felt like I was the only person on that whole mountain. An officer arrived faster than I expected, his cruiser headlights washing over the siding. I explained everything in a rush, and we went through the house together. Every room, every closet, the crawl space tucked behind the laundry room, even the little hatch that led to the low attic. No one. Not a single sign of a person out of place, except for that door, now standing open when I knew Id left it shut, and a faint, greasy smudge high up on the frame like someone's fingers had dragged there. The officer told me to call again if I heard anything and left. It was late, but there was no way I was going to sit alone on that couch watching a scary movie after that. I ate my food, standing up in the kitchen, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, then went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and texted my family and friends about what had happened, half for comfort and half so there would be a record if something worse came next. Before I went to bed, I noticed one more thing that made my stomach twist. The little closet door in the hallway outside my room, the one that opened to a shallow storage space under the eaves, was cracked open an inch. I was almost sure Id shut it earlier that day when Id grabbed a winter coat. Inside, the box I kept my childhood photos in was pulled out from the wall like someone had been sitting on it. I told myself I was imagining things, pushed it back, shut the door, and tried to sleep. I took a melatonin, and somehow, eventually, I drifted off. I'm a light sleeper, so when my phone buzzed again in the middle of the night, it yanked me straight up from sleep. The room felt wrong, the air heavy. The texts were from a number I didn't recognize, but the style gave it away immediately. It was Mara, apologizing in long, breathless paragraphs for everything, saying she wanted to talk, that she'd be better, that she just needed me to listen. Mixed in were shorter messages, stacking on top of each other like someone pounding on a locked door, asking if I was awake, telling me to wake up, repeating it over and over. I counted them later. Shed typed, "wake up," 8 times in a row. I remember thinking how surreal it was that Id just had a cop in my house a few hours earlier, and now I was reading this barrage of texts in the dark, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. I finally replied, telling her it was crazy to blow up my phone at that hour, that the last few days had only proved I couldn't be with her, that I needed her to leave me alone. I hit send. A second or two later, before I could even lock the screen, a scream exploded from the closet next to my bed. It was her voice, high and raw and way too close, shouting one word, "No." The closet door flew open so hard it banged against the wall. I didn't stop to think. I was out of bed and at the bedroom door in a heartbeat, adrenaline doing the moving for me. The lock had carefully clicked into place earlier, slid open under my hand in my panic. I didn't register that it felt looser than it should have, and I flung the door wide, bolted into the hallway, and slammed it shut from the outside. The knob jerked in my hand as she tried to pull it open from inside. Then I saw the knife. The point of it started stabbing through the cheap hollow core door, little bursts of wood popping out inches from my hip. I pressed my full weight against the door, feet braced, phone still somehow clutched in my fingers. Each time the knife punched through, it was closer to where my ribs would have been if I hadn't moved so fast. In that moment, I realized very calmly that if she'd chosen a slightly different angle, I might already be bleeding out on the hallway floor. Some stupid survival instinct kicked in, and instead of yelling at her or trying to reason with her logically, I said the one thing I thought might reach the version of her that still believed this was love. I told her I loved her. Not because I did, not anymore, but because I needed her to stop long enough for me to get help. The effect was immediate. The stabbing stopped. Her voice changed from a scream to this frantic, choked sound, asking why I hadn't been honest, why Id said we needed space if I still loved her, why Id made her feel crazy. As she sobbed and ranted through the door, I quietly dialed 911 again, pressed the phone to my ear, and whispered my address to the dispatcher, telling her there was someone in my room with a knife, that it was my ex, that I was holding the door shut. It felt like something out of a movie, but my legs were trembling and my palms were slick with sweat on the doorknob. I told Mara I was scared to open the door while she still had the knife, that if she dropped it, maybe we could talk. She argued, cried, begged. Eventually, I heard the dull clatter of metal hitting the floor and skittering across the room. Then a long, shuddering silence. I made her prove it by asking her to kick the knife across the room. I heard it hit the wall and slide. The next part is blurry in my memory, like my brain was already trying to protect me from it even as it happened. I yanked the door open and lunged at her, tackling her to the floor. She was smaller than me, but fought with this wild animal strength, scratching, kicking, twisting, trying to reach past me toward the far corner where the knife had landed. I pinned her wrist to the carpet and yelled my address and what was happening into the phone, not caring anymore if the whole mountain heard. At some point, the 911 operator told me officers were seconds away. When they blew my front door open downstairs, the crash was so loud it cut through Mara's screaming and my own ragged breathing. Heavy footsteps pounded up the staircase, and then the hallway was full of uniforms and shouted commands. They pulled me off her, got the knife, and cuffed her. She went from thrashing to sobbing in an instant. I didn't cry. I think I was too far past that into pure shock. The next months were a blur of court dates, statements, and legal language I'd never wanted to learn. He'd always been afraid of my name ending up in some article or true crime video, so I did everything I could to keep my identity out of the public side of it, which is part of why I'm still so careful now. Mara was eventually convicted on some serious charges. I know objectively that she earned the sentence she got, that I'm lucky to be alive. But there's no relief in knowing someone you once loved is sitting in a cell. Before that night, she was the person I texted first thing in the morning. The person I imagined building a life with in this quiet hill town. She also spent God knows how long hiding in my house, reading my texts over my shoulder from inside a closet, literally stabbing through my bedroom door while I held it shut. The realization that she'd been there during that first 911 call, probably hiding in that hallway closet or up in the low attic while a cop and I walked underneath her, still makes my skin crawl. Later, when I went back and looked, there were faint scuff marks on the inside of that closet door that hadn't been there before, and a single long hair caught in a hinge that wasn't mine. Those details live in my head more vividly than any courtroom transcript. What haunts me most, though, isn't just what she did, but how long I ignored the early warning signs because I was so desperate not to be alone again. How I brushed off her late-night drive-bys, her obsession with our texts, the way she tracked me like a GPS coordinate instead of a person. I still flinch when my phone blows up with more than a couple messages in a row. I still check my closets twice before bed, even in the new place I moved to a few towns over, where no one knows what happened. I know this story will stay with me for the rest of my life, but telling it, even like this, feels like letting some trapped air out of my lungs. If you've ever seen pieces of yourself in a situation like this, ignored your gut because you were afraid to lose someone, or watched red flags stack up and told yourself you were overreacting, I'd honestly like to hear what you wish you'd done differently, or what you'd tell someone stuck in it now. So if you feel up to it, share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe it'll help someone realize their story doesn't have to get this far.